Welcome to the podcast series The New Student Pharmacist, where we discuss chemistry and pharmacy, as well as leaders in pharmacy careers, community, and chemistry and pharmacy research. We encourage you to support the work we are doing and follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts by subscribing for free. Note, the views on the podcast represent those of my guest and I.
Purpose of these episodes not at all for advice or medical suggestions. These are aimed to provide support to peer pharmacists in training in educational and intellectually stimulating ways. Again, these are not at all for medical advice or medical suggestions. Please see your local board and state-certified health professional. The views of this podcast represent those of my guests and I.
Welcome back. It's time for the deep dive. And this time we're diving into something close to a lot of your hearts based on what you've sent in geriatric health and medications. You've really given us a lot to unpack here. Research, articles, personal stories. Someone's been doing their homework.
It's really great to see this level of interest. It's so important. And as our population ages, it's something we need to understand better, not just for ourselves, but for our loved ones and really for society as a whole.
I couldn't agree more. So to kick things off, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say the growing number of elephants. Older Americans. Key Indicators of Well-Being really emphasizes that the older population is increasing rapidly. It says that by the year 2030, the number of Americans 65 and older is projected to be double what it was back in 2000.
That's a huge demographic shift, and it means big changes for healthcare.
Exactly. And with more people in this stage of life, understanding the health challenges that come with it is more important than ever. Basic Concepts in Geriatrics give a really good overview of the leading causes of death for those 65 and older. No big surprises here. Heart disease is number one, followed by malignant neoplasms.
Which is cancer.
Right, cancer. And then unintentional injuries.
And while those are definitely concerns for all age groups, what makes this deep dive so interesting is understanding how those conditions can actually look different in older adults. That same source, Basic Concepts in Geriatrics, pointed out that something like a heart attack might not present with the typical symptoms in an older person. So instead of that classic crushing chest pain, they might have shortness of breath, nausea, even sudden confusion.
Wow, okay, so we can't just rely on those textbook symptoms. Are you saying someone could be having a serious cardiac event, but it might look like something else entirely?
Exactly. It just shows how important it is to pay attention to any changes in an older adult's health and not to hesitate to seek medical attention even if the symptoms seem a little unusual.
This is getting really real really fast. And then on top of those potential emergency situations, we also have to think about chronic conditions, which older Americans, Key Indicators of Well-Being reminds us, are incredibly common in this age group. We're talking hypertension, arthritis, heart disease again, cancer, diabetes conditions that often need multiple medications.
And that brings us to the heart of your deep dive, how aging and medication are connected. How do our bodies change the way they process medications as we get older, and what does that mean for patients and doctors? Age-related changes in drug pharmacokinetics really gets into the science behind this.
Okay, so let's break it down. We're talking about how the body handles medication from the moment it enters the system to how it's broken down and then how it leaves the body. What kinds of changes are we talking about in older adults?
Well, a lot of things change with age: gastric pH, body fat composition, liver function. All of these things change, and all of them can affect how medications are absorbed, distributed, metabolized, and excreted.
So it's like, imagine trying to bake a cake, but the oven temperature's off, and your measuring cups are a little wonky, and some of your ingredients are, I don't know, a different texture than they used to be. You might still end up with a cake, but it's probably not going to be quite what you expected.
I love that analogy. Because you're right, the result can be unpredictable. Like decreased blood flow to the liver, that's a common change with age, can mean certain medications that are processed there get metabolized more slowly, so they stay in the body longer, which can increase the risk of side effects.
And that's just the liver.
Yeah.
We haven't even talked about the kidneys, which are so important for filtering medications out of the bloodstream.
Exactly. And as we age, our kidneys don't always work as efficiently at filtering out waste products, including medications. That means medications can build up in the body, and again, that increases the risk of side effects.
So it sounds like older adults really are walking a tightrope when it comes to medication dosages. What might be a normal dose for a younger person could be way too much for someone older.
Exactly. It's all about individualized care, especially with medication. It's not one size fits all.
And with that in mind, I'm really curious to learn more about this Beers criteria that keeps popping up. What is it, and why is it important in geriatric care?
Yes. The Beers criteria, it's laid out in this AGS 2023 Beers Pocket Printable.pdf. It's essentially a set of guidelines designed to help healthcare providers identify medications that might not be appropriate or could be risky for older adults.
So it's like a safety checklist for preventing medication problems.
You could say that. It considers those age-related changes in drug response that we talked about and flags medications that are more likely to cause problems in older adults. This helps doctors and pharmacists prescribe safer medications and have those important conversations with their patients about the risks and benefits.
That's good, especially since a lot of older adults take multiple medications. So it's called polypharmacy, right?
Exactly. And the more medications someone takes, the greater the chance of interactions, side effects, or even bigger problems. The Beers criteria gives us a way to deal with this and promote safer medication use for older adults.
Okay, so we've established that aging bodies don't always react to medication the way we might expect, and we've got tools like the Beers criteria to help manage some of the risks. But reading through all this, something else that really struck me was how vulnerable older adults are to infections.
That's a really important point. And IT1 Intro to ID Bacterial Infections Fall 2024.finalstudent.pdf really gets into the nitty-gritty of it. The thing about infections in older adults is that the warning signs can be a lot less obvious.
Oh, so you're saying the symptoms might be more subtle, like a low-grade fever instead of a high one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Their immune response isn't always as strong, so the symptoms can be muted. Instead of a high fever, maybe they just feel a little off or a bit confused. Or instead of a painful, inflamed area, there might just be some redness or warmth. It's about noticing those small changes.
Wow, so early detection is even more important then. It's almost like trying to solve a puzzle, but some of the pieces are missing.
That's a great way to put it. It takes a lot of attention from both healthcare providers and anyone caring for older adults. The source talks about how important it is to pay attention to any changes in behavior or how well they're doing things day to day, or even just their overall well-being. These can all be early signs of infection, even if the usual symptoms aren't there.
So like if there's suddenly more forgetful, weaker, not eating as much, those sorts of things.
Exactly. Those can be big clues. And speaking of clues, that same source mentions something called left shift. They say it can be a red flag for a serious bacterial infection, especially in older people.
Left shift. Okay, I'm all ears. What is that?
It sounds complicated, but it's basically this. When your body's fighting a bacterial infection, it makes more white blood cells, specifically neutrophils. These are like the first line of defense for your immune system. A left shift means there are more immature neutrophils in the blood. It's kind of like sending in backup that hasn't been fully trained yet, a sign that there's a serious infection going on.
So even if the outward symptoms are vague, this left shift is like a blaring alarm for doctors.
Precisely. It's a key piece of information, especially when you combine it with what the doctor sees in the patient. It helps them diagnose and treat infections sooner, which is so important for older adults.
This is fascinating. I'm learning so much. We talked about bacteria, but I know viruses and fungi can be really dangerous too, especially as we age. What's the deal with those?
Yeah, they can be pretty sneaky. IT1 Intro to ID Fungal and Viral Fall 2024.finalinstructor.pdf does a good job explaining why these infections can really knock older adults down. Basically, as we get older, our immune system naturally weakens, which makes us more vulnerable to all kinds of infections.
So it's like our body's defense system just isn't as quick or as strong as it used to be.
Exactly. And that, combined with the fact that our organs don't work quite as well as we age, means that fungal and viral infections in older adults can be much more severe, they take longer to fight off, and there's a higher risk of complications.
Are there any specific types that older adults should be extra careful about?
Well, one that comes to mind is shingles. That's caused by the chickenpox virus, and it's more common in older folks. It causes a painful rash and can even lead to nerve pain. Fungal pneumonia is another one that's a big concern. It's harder to treat and has a higher death rate in older people.
You've got me wanting to go get my flu shot and make sure all my other vaccinations are up to date.
Not a bad idea at all. Staying current on vaccinations is one of the best ways to avoid getting seriously ill, especially for older adults.
Speaking of prevention, we've been talking a lot about medications and the potential risks, but what about things like herbs and supplements? People seem to be turning to them more and more these days, but are they safe, especially for older people?
It's a great question, and it's something a lot of people ask about. Dietary and natural supplements for obesity and Alzheimer's goes into this, looking specifically at supplements for weight loss and Alzheimer's disease.
Two big ones, especially as people get older. What did the source have to say about whether or not they're safe and effective?
Well, here's the thing. Just because something says it's natural or herbal on the label doesn't automatically mean it's safe, especially for older adults who might have other health issues or be taking other medications.
So that chamomile tea that helps me sleep might not be so harmless for grandma.
It's possible. This source really stresses that a lot of herbs and supplements can interact with common medications, and these interactions can be even stronger in older people. For example, St. John's wort, which people use for mood support, can actually make blood thinners less effective. That can increase the risk of blood clots.
Oh, wow. I had no idea something like St. John's wort could have such a serious interaction.
It just goes to show how important it is to be open with your doctor or pharmacist. Before taking any new supplement, even something that seems totally harmless, it's crucial for older adults to talk to their doctor or pharmacist to see if there are any risks or interactions.
Like they always say, better safe than sorry.
Absolutely. And that actually leads us to another fascinating area of healthcare that's becoming more and more important, especially as we move toward more personalized care, and that's pharmacogenomics.
Okay, I'll admit that one sounds a little intimidating. Can you break it down for me? What is pharmacogenomics and why should we even care?
It might sound like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it's becoming more and more common in medicine. It's basically the study of how our genes affect how our bodies respond to different medications.
Wait, so you're saying our DNA actually holds clues about how our bodies will react to certain drugs?
Exactly. It's like having a personalized instruction manual for how your body processes medications. Pharmacogenomics overview explains that tiny differences in our genes can affect how our bodies break down and use medications, which can change how effective they are or how likely you are to have side effects.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. We've talked about how aging bodies handle medications differently, the dangers of polypharmacy, and the need for personalized care and pharmacogenomics sounds like the next step in creating individual treatment plans.
You got it. By looking at a person's genetic makeup, healthcare providers can get clues about how their body might process certain medications. This can help them choose the right drug, adjust dosages, and even predict whether someone might have a bad reaction.
So instead of a one-size-fits-all approach to medication, we're moving towards a more personalized method based on a person's genes.
Exactly. And this is super relevant for older adults because they often have multiple health conditions and are on a lot of medications. Pharmacogenomics has the potential to really change how we manage medications for this group, maximizing their effectiveness while minimizing the risks.
You know, you mentioned before that I'd sent you some of my own pharmacogenetic testing results, and I remember feeling so overwhelmed when I first got them back. It was all these codes and terms I didn't understand. Can you give me an example of what those results can tell us and how they might be used in a real-life situation?
Absolutely. Those codes and terms are like a secret language,
Right.
and once you understand them, they can tell you a lot about how your body responds to medications.
So what kind of secrets might be hidden in those results?
For example, let's say your results show that you have a gene variant that makes you a slow metabolizer of a certain type of drug, like some antidepressants or blood thinners. This means your body breaks down those medications slower than average.
Okay, so what does that mean in real life? What are the implications of being a slow metabolizer?
Well, it means that if you were prescribed a standard dose of that medication, it could build up in your system faster, and you might be more likely to experience side effects or even have a toxic reaction.
Oh, that's a little scary. But with pharmacogenomics, you can know this ahead of time and change the treatment plan.
Exactly. That's the whole point. By knowing that you're a slow metabolizer, your doctor could give you a lower dose or switch you to a different medication that your body handles better. It's all about reducing risks and getting the best possible outcome for you.
It's like having a superpower in the fight for better health. But what about people who haven't had this type of testing done? Is it widely available? Can everyone get it?
That's a really important question. While pharmacogenetic testing is becoming more common, it's not yet a routine part of healthcare for everyone. We still have a long way to go.
So what's holding it back? Is it the cost? Or maybe a lack of awareness among doctors?
It's a bit of both, actually. The cost can be a barrier, and not all doctors are familiar enough with it to interpret the results and explain what they mean for treatment. And there's also a need to educate both doctors and the public about the benefits and limitations of pharmacogenomics.
It feels like we're on the verge of a major change in healthcare, but we're not quite there yet.
You're exactly right. There's so much potential here to really change how we prescribe and manage medications, but we need to make sure these advances are available to everyone, not just a select few.
That's a good point. Okay, switching gears a little bit, I'm curious about another aspect of geriatric health that we haven't talked about yet, electrolytes. I know whenever my electrolytes are off, I feel awful. But what's the significance of electrolytes in older adults specifically?
That's another great question, and you're right, electrolytes are vital for our health, and they become even more important as we age. Basically, electrolytes are minerals that carry an electrical charge when they're dissolved in fluids like our blood. They play a role in a ton of bodily functions like regulating your heartbeat, muscle contractions, fluid balance, and even nerve function.
Okay, so they're like these tiny electrical currents that keep our bodies running smoothly.
Exactly. And when those currents are disrupted, it can throw off all sorts of things, leading to a whole bunch of symptoms and health problems.
That makes sense. So what makes older adults more susceptible to these electrolyte imbalances in the first place?
Several things, really. First of all, as we age, our bodies naturally hold less water, making us more prone to dehydration, which can disrupt the balance. And then there's the fact that our kidneys don't always function as well as we get older, and that can affect how effectively our bodies regulate electrolytes. Plus, many older adults are taking medications like diuretics or heart medications, which can also throw electrolyte levels out of whack.
So it's like a perfect storm of factors that can really put older adults at risk.
You've got it. It's something that both healthcare providers and older adults need to be aware of.
You mentioned diuretics, which are often prescribed for high blood pressure. Those can affect potassium levels, right?
Absolutely. Diuretics help get rid of extra fluid in the body, but in doing so, they can also flush out potassium, leading to something called hypokalemia, or low potassium.
Low potassium? That doesn't sound good at all. What are the signs that someone might have low potassium?
It can be sneaky, especially in the early stages. Someone with hypokalemia might just feel tired or weak, have muscle cramps, or be constipated. But as potassium levels get lower, it can cause more serious problems, like an irregular heartbeat, which can be life-threatening.
Wow, that escalated quickly. It's kind of scary to think that something that seems as simple as an electrolyte imbalance could be so dangerous. What about the opposite? Can potassium levels get too high?
Yes, they definitely can. High potassium is called hyperkalemia, and it's also a concern, especially for older adults who might already have some kidney problems. It's not as common as hypokalemia, but certain medications, kidney disease, or even severe dehydration can trigger it.
So what should we be on the lookout for with high potassium?
Again, the symptoms can be all over the place. Weakness, fatigue, nausea, vomiting, maybe even heart palpitations or a heartbeat that seems slow or irregular. And in really bad cases, it can lead to cardiac arrest.
Okay, I'm seeing how crucial it is to be aware of these imbalances, especially when caring for older adults. It seems like regular blood work would be really important to catch them early on.
You're right. Regular blood tests can help keep track of those levels. If an imbalance is found, treatment usually involves figuring out what's causing it, maybe adjusting their medications, managing any kidney issues, or making sure they're drinking enough fluids. Sometimes medication can help too.
This is all so eye-opening. It's clear that getting older comes with a whole set of health challenges, from how our bodies handle meds to being more vulnerable to infections, and now the importance of electrolytes. It seems like a lot to keep track of.
It is. But, like we've been saying, knowledge is power. Understanding these challenges and working closely with their doctors can help older adults take proactive steps to stay healthy.
Well said. And speaking of being proactive, I want to loop back to something we touched on earlier, personalized medicine, specifically pharmacogenomics. You mentioned I'd shared some of my pharmacogenetic testing results with you. Can we walk through a hypothetical scenario using my results as an example? Let's say I'm an older adult with a few health conditions, taking several medications. What kind of information could my pharmacogenomic profile reveal, and how could it change my treatment plan?
Absolutely. Let's do it. Let's imagine you're taking a few different medications, maybe a blood thinner to help prevent strokes, a beta blocker for blood pressure, and perhaps an antidepressant as well.
Okay, sounds pretty typical for someone my age.
Right, very common. Now, let's say your pharmacogenetic testing shows that you have a gene variant that makes you a rapid metabolizer of a certain type of blood thinner.
Okay, so my body breaks down that specific blood thinner faster than average. What does that mean for me practically?
Well, it could mean that the usual dose wouldn't be as effective for you because your body's eliminating it too quickly. That could potentially put you at a higher risk of developing a blood clot even though you're taking the medication.
Oh, wow. That's a little unnerving.
But the good news is that with this information, your doctor could adjust the dosage or even switch you to a different kind of blood thinner that's a better fit for your genetic makeup.
That's amazing. It takes the guesswork out of it.
Exactly. And it's not just about how well it works, it's about safety too. Those results might also reveal that you're more likely to experience side effects from a certain type of beta blocker.
And then what?
Well, in that case, your doctor might decide to go with a different class of medication altogether, one that's less likely to cause those side effects for you.
That's truly personalized medicine. This is incredible stuff.
It really is remarkable, and it just shows you how important it is for older adults to talk to their doctors about this kind of testing to see if it's right for them and their health goals.
This entire deep dive has been so fascinating. We've covered so much, understanding how aging changes our bodies, how it affects our response to medication, recognizing those less obvious signs of infection, and now the importance of electrolytes and this whole new world of pharmacogenomics.
It's a lot to take in, but it's all connected.
It is. It seems like navigating healthcare as we age can feel really complex.
It definitely can be, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming.
That's reassuring to hear.
With the right information, by asking questions and working closely with their healthcare providers, older adults can take control of their health and make informed decisions that are best for them.
That's a great point. As we wrap up this deep dive, is there anything else you want to leave our listeners with today? Any final words of wisdom?
You know, I think the most important thing to remember is that aging is a natural part of life. It has its challenges, sure, but it also brings wisdom, experience, and opportunities for growth and connection. Embrace this chapter, speak up for your needs, and don't be afraid to ask for support when you need it.
I love that. Such an important message. And on that note, it's time for us to surface from this deep dive. We've explored some complex and fascinating aspects of geriatric health, but remember, this is just the beginning. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep advocating for your health. You've given us a really fascinating set of medical papers on geriatrics, pharmacology, and infectious disease. And it looks like you're particularly interested in how these areas all intersect when it comes to treating elderly patients.
Yeah, and that's such a crucial point to start with because, you know, treating older adults, it's not like treating a 20-year-old.
You're telling me, I mean, you look at the case of, what was her name? HW. Yeah, the 86-year-old woman from that Basic Concepts in Geriatrics article. And it's like, wow, talk about a challenge for doctors. A whole medical history there and a list of medications. I swear it was longer than my arm.
Yeah, and that's exactly what makes this whole deep dive so interesting, right? Because what works for a 30-year-old might completely backfire with someone like HW. Her case, with all those medications, it just screams polypharmacy, which is a huge issue in the elderly.
Polypharmacy. Okay. So that's where things get really complicated. I mean, we're not just talking about a bunch of medications, but a whole bunch of potential interactions.
Exactly. And those interactions can make it really hard to figure out what's going on. Like, you can have an older patient with a UTI, a simple UTI, and they might not even spike a fever. Imagine trying to diagnose that.
Yeah. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Right. And speaking of puzzles, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we've got to talk about how aging itself changes how our bodies handle medication.
Yeah, it's not just about wrinkles and gray hair, right?
You know, not at all. Think of it like this. When we're younger, The way our bodies process drugs, like how they get absorbed and broken down and all that, it's like a well-oiled machine.
Okay, makes sense.
But then we get older, and that machine, well, it might need a tune-up or two. Organs like the kidneys and liver, they might not be as efficient. And this is a big deal when it comes to certain medications, especially those that rely on the kidneys to get flushed out of the system.
Oh, okay. So what you're saying is a drug that might clear out of a younger person's body really quickly could actually hang around in an older person's system for much longer.
Exactly. In fact, that Basic Concepts in Geriatrics paper, it actually mentions digoxin as an example. That's a heart medication, and it's mainly cleared out by the kidneys. Doctors have to be really careful with the dosage for their older patients, especially if their kidneys aren't working at 100%.
That makes sense. Now, what about the liver? It breaks down drugs too, doesn't it?
It does, and it's another area where aging can have a big impact. The research you sent actually talks about diazepam, that anti-anxiety drug. Well, it turns out that its metabolism can slow down as people get older, which means there's a higher risk of side effects if the dosage isn't adjusted properly.
So even medications that are generally considered safe can become risky when you factor in age.
Exactly. And that's why having this deeper understanding is so crucial. It's not just about knowing which drug to prescribe, but understanding why it's the right choice, or if it even is the right choice. That's how we can make sure older patients are getting the safest and most effective treatment possible.
And all of that is without even thinking about any pre-existing conditions.
Oh, for sure. You have to remember many older folks are dealing with things like diabetes, heart disease, you name it. And these conditions can make the whole medication puzzle even more complicated.
Right, because it's like all these factors are influencing each other. It's a delicate balance.
It really is.
And then on top of all that, you mentioned that infections often present atypically in the elderly. So even if they have an infection, getting the diagnosis right can be tricky.
You got it. Like I was saying before about UTIs, sometimes that fever, which is often our first clue that something's up, it just doesn't show up in older patients, or it's much less noticeable.
Wow. So we're talking about a population that often has multiple health conditions, might be on multiple medications, and to top it all off, might not even show the typical sign of being sick.
Exactly, which is why this area of medicine, geriatric care, it requires a really special kind of awareness. It's about connecting the dots, seeing the bigger picture, and understanding that even common health problems might need a totally different approach.
It makes you wonder how often things get missed. I mean, the articles mention pneumonia, UTIs, and skin infections as being pretty common in this age group.
Yeah.
What makes them so susceptible to those, would you say?
Well, there are a few things at play. As we get older, our immune systems naturally decline. It's just a fact of life. It's like our body's defense system isn't quite as strong as it used to be.
So it's almost like our bodies become less effective at fighting off those infections as we get older.
Exactly. And then you add in other health problems that are more common in older adults, things like diabetes, heart disease, Those can further weaken the immune system. So it's like their bodies are fighting a losing battle on multiple fronts.
And it doesn't help that so many older adults are in hospitals or living in long-term care facilities.
Right, because while those settings provide crucial care, they can also expose people to more infections.
It's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, the Basic Concepts in Geriatrics article actually highlighted that the higher rates of healthcare-associated infections in the elderly, it's not surprising when you think about it. A weaker immune system coupled with increased exposure, it's a recipe for infections to take hold.
And then we get into the whole challenge of treating those infections, which, as we've been saying, isn't always straightforward in this population. We're talking about antibiotics, antifungals, even botanicals, all with their own quirks when it comes to treating older patients.
It's about choosing the right tool for the job, but also understanding how that tool might work differently in the hands of an older adult. Let's take antibiotics, for example. We know they're essential, but then you have the issue of antibiotic resistance rearing its ugly head, especially with older adults.
Yeah, the research you sent mentioned MRSA and VRE as examples, and those sound a little intimidating.
Yeah, they can be a real challenge. MRSA, that's methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, and VRE is short for vancomycin-resistant Enterococcus. Basically, we're talking about strains of bacteria that have become resistant to some of our most common antibiotics.
So how do doctors even begin to tackle that, especially when treating a population that's already more vulnerable to infections?
It's a multi-pronged approach for sure. One of the key things is something called antibiotic stewardship.
Okay, antibiotic stewardship, what exactly is that?
Basically, it means using antibiotics wisely. So not prescribing them unless they're absolutely necessary, and then making sure the specific antibiotic chosen is the best match for the infection.
So it's about using the right antibiotic for the right bug, like a lock and key.
Exactly. You want to make sure you're using the right key for the right lock, and not just trying any key in the bunch. The goal is to reduce unnecessary antibiotic use, which is a major driver of antibiotic resistance. And some hospitals are even using these things called antibiograms now.
Antibiograms, those sound pretty high-tech. What are they?
They're pretty interesting. They're basically reports that hospitals use to track which antibiotics are working best against the specific bacteria that are circulating within that hospital.
So it's like having a constantly updated game plan to fight off these resistant bacteria.
You got it. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's not forget about fungal infections. Those are another area where we need to be extra vigilant when treating the elderly.
Right. Those can be pretty nasty, especially for older adults. I remember reading about Candida and Aspergillus, those fungi. It said they can be really dangerous for folks with weakened immune systems or who have been in the hospital.
You're remembering correctly. And what makes these fungal infections even more concerning is that they can be very aggressive and therefore difficult to treat. Early diagnosis is absolutely key here.
So we need to catch them early.
Absolutely. And luckily, we have tests for that nowadays, like antigen and antibody tests, which help us diagnose fungal infections faster. But there's another piece to this puzzle that we often overlook, particularly when we're dealing with elderly patients who might have decades of medical history.
Let me guess. Polypharmacy.
That's a big one, but I was thinking more about drug allergies.
Oh, right. With more birthdays comes more opportunity to develop allergies.
Exactly. Plus, you have to consider that a lot of older patients might not even remember if they had a reaction to a medication, especially if it happened years ago.
Yeah, how do you keep track of everything?
That's where good communication and thorough record keeping come in. The basic concepts material emphasizes how important it is for healthcare providers to get a complete picture of their patients' medication histories, including any past allergies or bad reactions they've had. And it's not just about true allergies, the kind that involve the immune system.
Wait, so there are other types of allergic reactions?
There are, or at least reactions that seem like allergies but aren't actually caused by the immune system. We call those pseudo-allergic reactions.
Pseudo-allergic reactions, that's a new one.
They can be just as uncomfortable as true allergies, maybe even dangerous in some cases. Point is, we gotta be thorough, ask the right questions, and really listen to what our patients are telling us. It's like piecing together a puzzle, like you said earlier.
And speaking of puzzles, you mentioned botanicals before. Those are a whole other beast, right?
They can be. Many people assume that because something is natural, it must be safe.
Right, like how can chamomile tea be bad for you?
That's a common misconception and a potentially dangerous one, particularly for older adults.
So even though my grandma swears by her daily dose of ginkgo biloba,
You got to be careful. Botanicals can have some tricky interactions with prescription medications, sometimes with pretty serious consequences.
what?
One of the articles actually mentioned ginkgo biloba interacting with blood thinners like warfarin. Combining the two could increase the risk of bleeding, which is a major concern for anybody, but especially for older adults who are already more susceptible to bleeding issues.
So even if something is natural and you can buy it over the counter, it doesn't automatically mean it's safe, especially if you're taking other medications. It seems like good communication is crucial here.
It's essential. Patients need to be completely open with their doctors about everything they're taking, even those seemingly harmless vitamins and supplements.
And doctors need to be thorough in asking about them.
Exactly. It's a two-way street. Open communication between patients and doctors is paramount for safe and effective treatment, especially in this age group.
It's amazing how much we've uncovered about something as seemingly straightforward as treating infections. And what's really striking is that we've just scratched the surface when it comes to understanding how age impacts a person's response to medication and illness.
Oh, absolutely. What we've talked about today is just the tip of the iceberg, and that actually brings us to a fascinating and rapidly developing area in medicine, personalized medicine.
Personalized medicine. Tell me more.
Imagine a future where we can use a person's genetic information to predict how they'll respond to specific medications.
So instead of using the same approach for everyone, we're talking about custom-tailored treatments based on your genes. That sounds like something straight out of Star Trek.
It might sound futuristic, but it's becoming a reality. We're already seeing things like pharmacogenomic testing.
Pharmaco what now?
pharmacogenomic testing. Basically, it looks at how your genes might influence how your body reacts to certain drugs.
So instead of waiting to see how someone responds to a medication and maybe having to try a few different options, you could potentially use their genetic information to find the best and safest treatment from the get-go.
You've got it. It's all about minimizing risks, which is even more important for elderly patients, right? They're often more susceptible to those adverse drug events.
It's incredible to think that we might be able to treat illnesses this precisely in the future.
Yeah.
It could revolutionize healthcare.
It truly could. There are still challenges to overcome, but the progress being made, particularly in areas of pharmacogenomics, is incredibly promising.
This whole conversation has been eye-opening. It really makes you appreciate how much goes into providing good healthcare, especially for older adults.
It really does, and it highlights how dynamic the field of medicine is, always evolving, always seeking new and innovative ways to care for patients.
It's like we've traveled through time with this deep dive, from the immediate challenges of treating infections in older adults to this amazing future where personalized medicine could change the game entirely.
It just goes to show you these fields we've been talking about, geriatrics, pharmacology, infectious disease, they're all interconnected. You can't really understand one without considering the others.
It really underscores how much thought has to go into treating patients as they age. It's not as simple as, oh, you're 70, here's the standard dose.
Absolutely not. You hit the nail on the head there. It's about understanding that what might work perfectly well for a younger person could be completely inappropriate or ineffective for an older adult. Their medical history, their lifestyle, their individual needs, all of that has to factor into the equation.
There's that detective work again.
It's essential. Healthcare providers have to be so thorough, asking the right questions, really listening to their patients, and then piecing it all together.
And so much of what we've talked about boils down to good communication.
It really does. That open, honest communication between patients and their doctors, and even between different doctors on a patient's healthcare team, it can make all the difference.
Sharing information, understanding the risks, and working together to figure out the best approach for that individual patient.
Absolutely. And this is especially critical for elderly patients who might be seeing a cardiologist, a rheumatologist, a primary care physician, all these different specialists. Making sure everyone's on the same page can be life-saving.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the key things you hope our listeners will take away from this conversation?
Well, first and foremost, aging isn't a one-size-fits-all process. Everyone ages differently, and their healthcare should reflect that.
It's about personalized care, not just age-based care.
Exactly. Second, we have to remember that medications, even those we generally consider safe, can have very different effects on older patients. So being aware of those potential interactions, adjusting doses carefully, and keeping a close eye on how patients are responding, that's crucial.
And listeners, don't underestimate the power of being your own advocate. Ask questions, speak up, and make sure your voice is heard.
Absolutely. And finally, while there are certainly challenges in treating infections in older adults, especially with the rise of antibiotic resistance, we can't lose sight of the incredible advancements happening in medicine. Personalized medicine holds so much promise for improving how we diagnose, treat, and manage health in aging populations.
It's an exciting time to be in medicine, despite the complexities. We're always learning, always refining our approaches to make sure patients of all ages are getting the best possible care. Well, this has been a fascinating exploration. I think we've all learned a great deal about this intricate intersection of geriatrics, pharmacology, and infectious disease.
Thanks for
Thank you so
listening
much
to the
for joining
podcast
us.
series The New Student Pharmacist, where we discuss chemistry and pharmacy, as well as leaders in pharmacy careers, community, and chemistry and pharmacy research. We encourage you to support the work we are doing and follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts by subscribing for free. We are so glad that you were able to tune in today. Note: the views on the podcast represent those of my guest, and I take care and all the best.